Hi everyone. Before we begin, I'd like to kindly ask you to mute your phones. You're welcome to take photos throughout the presentation, but please avoid using the flash. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Yonatan Tepperberg. I've been working at Cloverbyte for over 7 years now. I started as a designer, but ended up being a tech artist. I worked on GRIME since its inception up until post-launch, including all of the patches and DLC. I'm currently working on GRIME 2. My responsibilities include shaders, integration, optimization, and community management, because we're indie. I'm going to say we a lot in this presentation. What I mean by this is either myself or one of these two fine gentlemen, Theodore Kovalyov, tech lead at Cloverbyte, and Esteval Arantes, head of technology at Akupara Games, our publisher. We'll start at the beginning, which is the endpoint of the development of GRIME 1 and its release on PC on August 2nd, 2021. For those who don't know, GRIME is a fully 3D game made in Unity, where you play as a humanoid black hole. We started development in Unity 2017 and are now using Unity 2021.3. We're using the built-in render pipeline, as the lightweight render pipeline was just announced when we were already in production. And transitioning to the now stable universal render pipeline was just too much of an effort. GRIME is what you might call a visually complex game with many layers of depth, 3D objects far off in the distance, particle effects scattered around the world, and lots of objects composing a single scene. GRIME's launch went pretty well, all things considered. We tested the game before launch on an old PC and got good results, which players corroborated. We did have some technical issues at launch, which we addressed, and actually used them as a promotional opportunity in the form of a feedback patch, along with an associated video. Looking back, the fluctuation between the minimum and maximum FPS rates was a bit of a warning sign, but it's not bad for a debut game. So with these numbers, porting should be easy, right? No, not really. We did have some outstanding issues on console, some of which were easier to fix than others. For example, we used deferred rendering, which has a high base cost on Switch. We couldn't change to forward rendering, as this would require us to remake the lighting throughout the entire game. Memory management was also an issue, as addressables weren't a thing, and asset bundles were, and still are, an eldritch monstrosity beyond human comprehension. We also have lots of overdraw, which I'll touch on a bit later. So now what? The game has already been announced at Nintendo's event, no less, so people are expecting its release. We have went through multiple porting teams with varying results. One of them was even directly recommended to us by Nintendo. So we decided that if we want to get this done, we'll have to do it ourselves. We ported the game as is from PC to Switch with minimal optimizations just to get the game running. If we want the game to run at a stable 30 FPS frame rate, we need to have the CPU and GPU finish all of their work within 33 milliseconds. We also can't cross the 2.7 gigabyte memory usage threshold, as this would result in a crash. So we tested the game, got the results, and we had some work to do. This brings me to the main part of this presentation. Throughout development, we've employed several workflows, techniques, and general optimization tweaks to get the game stable and in the satisfactory state that is ready for Nintendo's lot check, which is their verification test that we must pass if we want to get the game on their platform. Let's go over a few of them, starting with the CPU. Some scenes were very complex in terms of the number of objects being rendered on the screen at any given time. In some cases, those objects were merged together, more on that later, but there were cases where that was just not possible. Culling alone took well over 10 milliseconds in some of the more complex scenes. Built-in solutions like Unity's baked occlusion culling were of limited use because of the camera's perspective. SDevOps implemented a solution that loads assets based on their distance from the player. Whoops. Based on their distance from the player, which includes particularly initialization-heavy objects like enemies and game mechanics. Our scenes all have a topmost game object called the scene carrier, which includes some important manager scripts like the calling manager, which reads the object's bound radius and enables it only when it enters the camera's view frustum. In addition to lowering the scene's visual complexity and draw call amounts, this also yielded the bonus benefit of removing unnecessary script overhead. Later areas in the game were more nature-inspired and had lots of vegetation. We didn't use Unity's built-in terrain tools, so we missed out on its associated optimizations like terrain objects and grass objects and instant meshes. While we did use GPU instancing, which yielded better results for us than static batching, we still had many batches to render in a given frame. To combat this, I merged objects together that share the same material using an asset called Polyview, which you can get from the Unity Asset Store. This is not a perfect solution, as this was a lot of manual work and also yielded unique heavy objects which increased the game size on disk and in memory. That said, Polyview allowed me to not only merge many objects together, but also reduce their polygon count. So not only did we have fewer game objects in the scene, but also fewer batches and less polygons per batch. If we wanted to make more far-reaching changes, like reducing light counts or object complexity, while still keeping the high-quality features available for the more powerful platforms like PC and high-end consoles, we needed to modify our scenes. Our programmer extraordinaire Theodore made a tool that splits scenes into fidelity levels, where the contents of the level change based on the selected quality setting. With the switch, we build and load the low-fidelity scenes exclusively, which contain fewer and lower quality assets. This tool allows us to mark objects to be removed in the baked scenes. So, for example, I could merge objects together while still keeping the individual objects available in the authoring scene in case I needed to fix anything. It also came with a component that allowed me to mark objects to exist in a specific fidelity level. So, for example, I could group together high complexity visual effects and make sure they only exist in the high fidelity scenes, and vice versa, grouping together lower quality, lower complexity effects and make sure they only exist in the medium and low fidelity scenes. So that was a quick overview of some of the things we did for the CPU. Let's talk about the GPU next. It's common knowledge that more polygons, or vertices really, means more performance cost. This is especially true for vertex-based effects, like per-vertex sliding, or animation through vertex movement via shaders. We went with poly reduction early on, and as this is our debut game, mistakes were made, and we found ample opportunity to reduce the polygon counts on many of the assets in the game. Using Polyview, I went over our assets and reduced their polygon count while still keeping their shape mostly intact. For objects in the background, I used more extreme values, and in some cases, some objects were converted into planes with normals by our artists. In fact, for GRIME 2, Theodore went ahead and made a whole tool that converts multiple objects into a single plane with normals that looks almost identical to the source material. Fun fact, by the way, when I made this slide, I pasted the images and had to step away for a few minutes, and when I came back, I couldn't tell which image represented which quality level, so I think we did a pretty good job. Our scenes are composed of layers of planes that give a sense of depth and also colorize them. In many cases, those planes cover the entire screen and overlap with each other, which means we have high fill rate and lots of overdraw. To address this, I reduced their count and size, compensating with increased color intensity. The same was done to particles where it made sense. Thanks to the scene baking tool, we were able to keep the original quality on PC and high-end consoles, while also allowing PC players to reduce their fidelity level for extra performance. We reduced the rendering resolution to about 83%, on the Switch for easy GPU gains. This was a common solution found in many of the 3D games released on Switch. We settled for 83% as a good balance between visual fidelity and performance. As for upscaling, we attempted to use AMD's Fidelity FX Super Resolution 1.0 when one of the porting teams implemented it, but it came with too much overhead to be useful. The same happened when we tried to use Unity's implementation of it in URP for GRIME 2. That's a bit about the GPU. Let's move on to memory. Memory management was a high priority for us when porting to the Switch. Before Estevao implemented addressables, every asset would load until we called the unload unused assets function. On the map, which was composed of many high-resolution images that you can see here in the video, in the first release of GRIME, this map was loaded constantly and would never unload. In fact, when you watch old gameplay, you could see that players, when they opened the map screen, the map showed up immediately. This is because it would never unload, even when the map screen was closed. This issue was exacerbated when the player progressed through the game, collected new items, and loaded new sprites associated with them. Addressables allowed us to call objects into and out of memory very easily, which was critical with the map as it was incredibly memory consumptive. It also allowed us to bundle assets by area in the game, although it wasn't perfect since we reused many of our assets throughout the game as a cost-saving measure. You can see in the image here how parts of the map fade in as they enter the screen, thanks to addressables. The same technique was used for inventory icons as well. Texture compression is an obvious approach. We reduced the texture size in memory through a maximum size limit in Unity, and also turned off mipmaps, as there was no need for them because of the camera's perspective. However, their size was still an issue in some of the more complex areas. We used ASTC compression to bring down their size even more, while also improving rendering performance as this format decompresses faster on the Switch's GPU. Using a block size of between 6x6 to 8x8, depending on the type of texture, we yielded several hundred kilobytes of memory savings per texture over the default ETC 3, 5, or 7 compression offered by Unity. Multiply this saving across several hundreds of textures, and the benefit quickly becomes apparent. Also remember, this reduces their size on disk, which is important for physical releases. Our level streaming solution involved a volume that encompasses a scene. While the player is inside the volume, the scene is loaded, either into memory or visually, depending on if the player is within the outer or inner bounds of the volume. There were some setbacks to this method. Our levels are not rectangular in nature, so many scenes required multiple volumes to be loaded properly. The large number of volumes resulted in some performance overhead, which we solved by grouping together volumes and unloading the unnecessary ones based on the player's location. However, loading scenes into memory takes a lot of memory space due to all of the references being loaded alongside them. So we had to split our scenes into smaller pieces, making sure that as few scenes were loaded as possible at any given time. This, together with addressables, meant that we were able to mitigate the impact of level streaming on memory in most of the areas of the game. Now, there are many other changes that we've done to get the game running on Switch properly. And honestly, if I were to stand here and talk about each and every one of them, I would be standing here for the rest of the day. So instead of doing that, I'd like to leave you with some final remarks. There are many ways for you to improve performance, so be sure to explore. Read the documentation, watch videos, and consult others in forums. Decimating your shader complexity won't help you if your bottleneck comes from an overly complex script, so be sure to identify your issues first. Profile your game, identify the bottlenecks, and then work on fixing them. If you're short on time and have many pain points, it's okay to go wide. Just be wary of your results. Many changes can affect multiple systems. So while you may end up with a better frame time by the end of it, one of your changes might be detrimental and you wouldn't necessarily know it. Optimize early and often if you can and it's easy. Doing stuff like limiting the maximum resolution of textures is super easy in Unity, so you should probably do it early. I hope you found this presentation useful. If you have any questions or would like to share your thoughts, please reach out to me through email, LinkedIn, or here on the show floor. Have a great rest of your day. I was asked, how do you get the Switch development kit?
Hey.
You do this by registering on Nintendo's website, putting in your company details as well as your game details, and once they approve it, you should be able to purchase a dev kit from them. It's probably a little more complex these days, as shipments to Israel are kind of on and off. It might be possible for you to purchase a dev kit and then travel to someplace else to collect it, but these are specific details that I'm not fully aware of. We got our dev kits through our publisher specifically.
אוקיי, תודה. פיצלתם את הסצנה הגדולה, לפי מה שהצגת, לסצנות קטנות. עכשיו, במקרה כזה, הם כאילו רואים אותם ניתנות ברקע, או בעצם מה קורה, אם זה לא מגביל?
מה שעשינו, בעצם פיצלנו את הסצנות באמת לחלקים, אבל דאגנו שכל חלק נטען ויזואלית, לפני שהשחקן בכלל נכנס לשם. אז בעצם הבאונס של הווליום קצת יותר גדולים ממה שהם אמורים להיות.
כמה זמן לקח לכם בערך לעשות את השינויים האלו מאז שהבנתם שאתם צריכים לעשות שינויים מאז שהראית את הגרף הזה של הפרפורמנס עד שהגעתם למצב שבו אתם יכולים לשחרר את זה בנינטנדו?
זה לקח לנו כמה חודשים ארוכים. וזה לא כולל את ה-back and forth שהיה לנו עם publishing groups, לא publishing groups, porting groups כאלה ואחרים. אז לקח המון זמן.
רציתי לשאול רק את השינויים שעשיתם לסוויץ', מה שהצלחתם כאילו להקטין וזה, אם יש דברים שהכנסתם לשאר הקונסולות, למחשב?
כמעט הכל נכנס גם לקונסולות.
העברתם את זה כאילו בתור עדכון או שפשוט?
כן, כן, פשוט כעדכון. הרליס של הסוויץ' ספציפית תוזמן יחד עם ה-DLC האחרון שלנו, שהוא חינמי כמו כל שאר ה-DLC שלנו, אז הוא יצא כפאץ', אז בעצם הכל, כולל האופטימיזציות, יצאו כבר כפאץ' לכל הפלטפורמות.
עניין אותי אם הגעתם קודם כל למצב של סטייבל סטייט עם הביצועים כדי להגיע למינימום של הדרישה של נינטנדו ואז שחררתם ואז עשיתם עוד גרסאות או שאתם עשיתם את המקסימום של ה-performance optimization קודם?
עקרונית 30 FPS זה לא דרישה של נינטנדו ספציפית, זה פשוט איזשהו בר שהצבנו לעצמנו. וכן, אנחנו עבדנו ממש 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 קשה לגרום לזה לרוץ ב-30 FPS, לאו דווקא יציב, גם עכשיו יש מקומות שזה קצת צולל מתחת, אבל עבדנו מאוד קשה לגרום לזה להגיע למצב הזה, ואז העלינו את זה ללוט צ'ק של נינטנדו.
והיו עוד עדכונים אחרי זה גם?
היה עוד עדכון אחרי זה ששיפר כמה טענות שהיו לשחקנים, ספציפית בנושא של פידבק של השליטה, שזה הרגיש קצת בדיליי, אבל כן. זהו, זה בעיקרון. לא רלוונטי לנו, אבל אנחנו כן עוקבים אחרי התפתחויות חדשות ביוניטי ומנסים לראות מה רלוונטי מתי. תודה רבה. יש מה עוד שאלה? שאלה אחת? QA עשינו, בגלל שהסטודיו הוא כזה סוג של חברת בת של מכללת יונתן, אז משכנו סטודנטים כל הזמן בשביל לבדוק את המשחק. גם בתהליך הפורטינג, אם נדבר ספציפית על הסוויץ', ה-QA נעשה בעיקר על ידי הפאבלישר שלנו, גם אנחנו עשינו QA בעצמנו. וכן, בעיקרון משכנו אנשים וביקשנו להם לשחק, ויישמנו תיקונים רלוונטיים, לאו דווקא שינויים לגיימפליי או שינויים עיצוביים, אבל שינויים של תקלות שצריך לתקן. תודה רבה, שוב.